The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, painting the weathered buildings in shades of gold and amber. Evangeline Harper pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked past the general store, her boots making soft sounds against the packed earth. At 19, she had learned to move quietly through town, drawing as little attention as possible to herself. The whispers followed her. "Anyway, there goes Black Jack Harper's girl," came the hushed voice from behind the mercantile's window. "Still can't believe she has the nerve to show her face around decent folk." Evangeline's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. 3 years had passed since her father's death. 3 long years since the notorious outlaw had been gunned down in a bank robbery gone wrong 2 counties over. Yet the shadow of his reputation clung to her like smoke from a dying fire. She paused at the edge of town, where the wooden sidewalk gave way to open prairie. The vast expanse of grassland stretched endlessly before her, interrupted only by distant rolling hills and the occasional stand of cottonwood trees. This was where she felt most at peace. Away from the judging eyes and whispered accusations. The truth was, Evangeline had spent most of her life trying to distance herself from her father's legacy. While Black Jack Harper had been robbing banks and running with dangerous men, she had been raised by her grandmother in a small cabin on the outskirts of Copper Ridge. Her grandmother, Sarah Whitmore, had been a respectable woman who taught school and tended to the sick, but when consumption claimed her 2 winters ago, Evangeline found herself truly alone in the world. No one in town would hire the outlaw's daughter. The banker refused to extend credit. The ladies' auxiliary crossed the street when they saw her coming. Even the preacher's wife had made it clear that certain pews in the church were not meant for someone with parentage. She had been surviving on odd jobs and the kindness of a few brave souls who were willing to risk their reputation to help her. Mrs. Chen at the laundry let her mend clothes in exchange for soap and supplies. Old Pete at the livery stable allowed her to sleep in the hayloft during the coldest nights, but it was a precarious existence, and Evangeline knew that winter was approaching fast. The sound of hoofbeats on the hard-packed road drew her attention. A rider was approaching from the south, sitting tall in his saddle despite the dust that covered his dark clothing. As he drew closer, Evangeline recognized him as Wyatt Crenshaw, owner of the largest cattle ranch in 3 counties. She had seen him in town before, but they had never spoken. He was a man in his early 30s, with weathered hands and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Unlike many of the other prominent citizens of Copper Ridge, he had never crossed the street to avoid her or whispered cruel comments within her hearing. Wyatt reined in his horse as he approached, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Miss Harper," he said, his voice warm and measured. "Might I have a word with you?" Evangeline felt her heart skip with nervousness. She couldn't imagine what business the most successful rancher in the territory might have with her. "Of course, Mr. Crenshaw," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. His horse, a magnificent bay gelding, stood quietly as Wyatt approached her. "I've been thinking," he began, his hands clasped behind his back. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez, is getting on in years. She's been asking for help with the cooking and cleaning, especially with the harvest season approaching and extra hands coming through." Evangeline's eyes widened. She had heard stories about the Crenshaw Ranch, how it sprawled across thousands of acres, how the main house was a sprawling structure with more rooms than she could imagine. But more importantly, she had heard that Wyatt Crenshaw was a fair man who treated his workers with respect. "I know what people in town say about you," Wyatt continued, his eyes meeting hers directly. "But I've also made it my business to learn the truth about folks before I make judgments. Your grandmother was one of the finest women I ever knew, and from what I can observe, she raised you to be the same kind of person." A lump formed in Evangeline's throat. It had been so long since anyone had spoken kindly about her or her family. "Mr. Crenshaw, I don't know what to say you'll consider it," he replied with a gentle smile. "The work would be honest, and the pay would be fair. You'd have a clean room in the main house and 3 good meals a day. Mrs. Rodriguez is a wonderful woman, and I think you'd find the ranch a peaceful place to make a fresh start." The offer seemed too good to be true, and Evangeline found herself searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. But all she saw was genuine kindness and something that looked remarkably like hope. She asked finally, "Why would you risk your reputation to help someone like me?" Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his gaze turning to the vast prairie that stretched beyond them. "I suppose because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control," he said slowly. "My father lost this ranch in a poker game when I was 16. Took me 15 years of hard work and careful planning to buy it back. During those years, people in town looked at me like I was just another failed rancher's son with impossible dreams. He turned back to her, and she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Everyone deserves a chance to prove who they really are, Miss Harper. Your father's choices don't define you any more than my father's mistakes defined me. The wind picked up, causing the tall grass around them to sway like ocean waves. Evangeline pulled her shawl closer, not from cold but from the overwhelming emotion that threatened to spill over. For the first time in years, someone was offering her more than mere survival. They were offering her dignity. When would you need an answer? She asked, her voice thick with unshed tears. Take your time, Wyatt replied, remounting his horse with easy grace. But know that the offer stands for as long as you need to consider it. The ranch is about 5 miles south of town, just past Miller's Creek. The main gate has a wooden sign with a burned-in C4. Crenshaw, he touched his hat brim again in farewell and turned his horse back toward the road. But before he had gone more than a few steps, he called back over his shoulder, Miss Harper, your grandmother would be proud of the woman you've become. Don't let anyone tell you different. With that, he spurred his horse into a gentle canter and disappeared down the dusty road, leaving Evangeline standing alone at the edge of town with her heart full of possibility for the first time in years. That evening, she sat in her small rented room above the millinery shop, turning Wyatt's offer over in her mind. The room was barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, and the walls were thin enough that she could hear every conversation from the street below. It wasn't much, but it had been her sanctuary for the past 2 years. The idea of leaving Copper Ridge both thrilled and terrified her. This town held all of her painful memories, but it was also the only home she had ever known. Her grandmother was buried in the cemetery behind the Methodist church. The schoolhouse where she had learned to read still stood at the end of Elm Street. Every corner held some piece of her past, both bitter and sweet. But as she listened to the familiar sounds of the town settling in for the night, the closing of shop doors, the laughter from the saloon, the bark of dogs and the lowing of cattle, she realized that staying would mean accepting a lifetime of whispers and sideways glances. It would mean growing old alone, forever defined by her father's crimes rather than her own character. The next morning, Evangeline made her decision. She packed her few belongings into a worn carpet bag, her grandmother's Bible, a handful of letters, 2 dresses, and a winter coat that had seen better days. She settled her account with Mrs. Patterson at the millinery shop and said goodbye to the few people who had shown her kindness during her difficult years in town. Mrs. Chen pressed a small package of tea into her hands. For luck in your new home, the older woman said with a shy smile. Old Pete at the livery stable tipped his hat and wished her well. Even the preacher's wife, who had always been cold to her, nodded stiffly as she passed the church. The walk to the Crenshaw ranch took her through countryside she had never seen before. The road wound past rolling hills dotted with cattle, through groves of aspen trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold with the approaching autumn. A creek ran alongside the road for several miles, its clear water bubbling over smooth stones and creating a peaceful soundtrack for her journey. As she walked, Evangeline found herself thinking about her father for the first time in months. Black Jack Harper had been a complicated man, charming and intelligent, but also reckless and driven by demons she had never fully understood. Her memories of him were fragments, scattered across her childhood like pieces of a broken mirror. She remembered him teaching her to ride when she was 7, his hands steady on the reins as he led her pony around the corral behind her grandmother's house. She remembered his laugh, rich and booming, when she told him silly jokes during his infrequent visits. But she also remembered the worry in her grandmother's eyes whenever he appeared at their door, and the relief when he left again. He had never been truly cruel to her, but he had also never been truly present. His love had been a wild, unpredictable thing, like trying to hold on to the wind. And when he died, shot down in broad daylight while fleeing a failed robbery, part of Evangeline had felt relief alongside the grief. Relief that she would no longer have to wonder when his choices would finally catch up with all of them. The wooden sign marking the entrance to the Crenshaw ranch appeared around a bend in the road, exactly as Wyatt had described. The sea was burned deep into the weathered wood, and someone had recently repaired the fence posts on either side. Beyond the gate, a well-maintained road led toward a cluster of buildings in the distance. Evangeline paused at the threshold, her hand resting on the gate latch. This was her moment of choice. She realized she could still turn back, return to Copper Ridge and the familiar hardship of her current life, or she could step through this gate and into the unknown future that Wyatt Crenshaw was offering her. The decision, when it came, was easier than she had expected. She lifted the latch and walked through the gate, her footsteps sure and steady on the packed earth road. The main house was even more impressive than she had imagined. Built of warm red brick with white painted shutters and a wide wraparound porch, it sat on a small rise overlooking the ranch buildings below. Flower gardens bordered the walkway, and she could see vegetable plots stretching behind the house. Everything spoke of prosperity, but more importantly, it spoke of care and attention to detail. As she approached the front steps, the door opened and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 60 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes that reminded Evangeline of her grandmother. This had to be Mrs. Rodriguez. "You must be Miss Harper," the woman said warmly, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. "Mr. Wyatt said you might be coming by. I'm Maria Rodriguez, and I've been hoping you'd decide to join us." The genuine welcome in the older woman's voice brought tears to Evangeline's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I hope I can be helpful to you." "Oh, my dear, you already are," Maria replied, taking Evangeline's carpet bag and ushering her toward the porch. "I've been rattling around in this big house like a dried pea in a gourd. It will be wonderful to have another woman around to talk to." The inside of the house was as impressive as the exterior, but it was also warm and welcoming rather than intimidating. The front hall opened onto a large sitting room with comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace. Through an archway, she could see a dining room with a long oak table that could easily seat 12 people. "Mr. Wyatt is out checking on the cattle in the south pasture," Maria explained as she led Evangeline up a staircase to the second floor. "He'll be back for supper. I thought you might like to rest a bit and get settled in your room before then." The room Maria showed her to was larger than the entire space Evangeline had occupied above the millinery shop. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, covered with a quilt in shades of blue and yellow. A writing desk sat beneath one of the two windows, and a comfortable chair was positioned to catch the afternoon light. This was Mr. Wyatt's sister's room. Before she married and moved to Denver, Maria explained, she said it was to remain ready for any woman who might need a safe place to land. "I think she would be pleased to know it's being put to such good use." That evening, Evangeline met Wyatt properly for the first time in his own home. He appeared at the dinner table wearing a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He looked younger somehow, more relaxed than he had seemed on the dusty street in town. "I'm glad you decided to come," he said simply, holding her chair as she sat down at the polished dining table. Maria has been beside herself with excitement all afternoon. The meal that followed was unlike anything Evangeline had experienced in years. Maria had prepared roasted chicken with herbs from the garden, fresh bread that was still warm from the oven, and vegetables that tasted of sunshine and rich soil. But more than the food, it was the conversation that nourished her soul. Wyatt told stories about the ranch, about the personalities of various cattle and horses, about his plans for expanding the operation in the coming years. Maria shared gossip from town that was kind rather than cruel, news about births and marriages and small triumphs. And gradually, almost without realizing it, Evangeline found herself contributing to the conversation, sharing her own thoughts and observations. When Maria mentioned that the school teacher in town was looking for someone to help with the younger children's reading lessons, Evangeline surprised herself by showing interest. "My grandmother taught me to love books," she said quietly. "I've always thought it would be wonderful to pass that love on to others." "Then you should speak to Miss Patterson, that's the schoolteacher." "Not the lady at the millinery shop," Wyatt said with an encouraging smile. "She's been struggling with the large class sizes, and I think she'd welcome the help." After dinner, Wyatt excused himself to check on the horses, and Maria insisted on washing the dishes alone. "You've had a long day, dear. Why don't you sit on the porch and watch the sunset? It's particularly beautiful from here." Evangeline stepped out onto the wide porch and settled into one of the wooden rocking chairs. The view was indeed spectacular. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The rolling hills stretched endlessly in all directions, and she could hear the distant sound of cattle calling to each other across the pastures. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Evangeline felt a sense of peace settling over her like a comfortable blanket. The knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for years began to loosen, replaced by something that felt remarkably like hope. She was still sitting there when Wyatt returned from the barn, his boots making soft sounds on the wooden porch boards. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, Wyatt spoke. "I want you to know that there are no expectations here beyond honest work and mutual respect. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "Why?" Evangeline asked the same question she had posed in town the day before. "Why are you doing this for me?" Wyatt was quiet for so long that she began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and thoughtful. My sister Catherine was 16 when our father lost a ranch. She was engaged to be married to a young man from a good family in town. When word got out about our financial troubles, his family put pressure on him to break the engagement. He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his rocking chair. Catherine was heartbroken, but she held her head high. She took work as a seamstress to help support our family, and she never once complained about the whispers or the cold shoulders she received in town. It took her years to find love again, to believe that someone could see past our family's troubles to the wonderful woman she was. The night sounds of the prairie filled the silence between them, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through the grass, the soft lowing of cattle settling in for the night. Everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, Wyatt continued, not for their family's past or their circumstances, but for their own character and choices. Catherine taught me that, and I've tried to live by it ever since. Evangeline felt tears prick her eyes. Your sister sounds like a remarkable woman. She is, Wyatt replied with obvious affection. She's happy now, married to a man who values her for exactly who she is. They have 3 children and a house full of laughter, but it took years for her to trust that good things were possible again. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, gentle but clear. Time and patience and the belief that she deserved good things in her life. Over the following weeks, Evangeline settled into a routine that brought her more satisfaction than she had thought possible. Her mornings were spent helping Maria with the household tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes and linens. But rather than feeling like drudgery, the work felt purposeful and peaceful. Maria proved to be an excellent teacher, showing her how to prepare the hearty meals that sustained the ranch hands, how to preserve vegetables from the garden for the winter months ahead, and how to manage the countless details that kept a large household running smoothly. More than that, she became the maternal figure that Evangeline had been missing since her grandmother's death. In the afternoons, Evangeline often helped with tasks around the ranch itself. She learned to tend the chickens, gathering eggs and making sure they had fresh water and feed. She helped with the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes and preparing the soil for winter. Sometimes she even assisted with the gentler horses, brushing them down after the ranch hands had finished their work for the day. But it was the evenings that she treasured most. After supper, when the dishes were done and the ranch had settled into quiet, she and Wyatt would often sit on the porch and talk. Their conversations ranged from practical matters, plans for the ranch, news from town, observations about the changing weather, to deeper topics about books they had read, dreams they harbored, and perspectives on life that they had gained through their respective struggles. Wyatt, she discovered, was far more educated than his practical appearance might suggest. He had attended college back east for 2 years before his father's gambling debts forced him to return home and take responsibility for the family's remaining assets. He read voraciously, ordering books by mail from Denver and San Francisco, and he had opinions on everything from agricultural techniques to political developments to the latest literary works. 3 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, Miss Patterson, the schoolteacher, came calling. She was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and a direct manner of speaking that Evangeline found refreshing after years of encountering people who wouldn't meet her gaze. Mr. Crenshaw tells me you might be interested in helping with the children's reading lessons, Miss Patterson said without preamble, settling into the parlor chair that Maria had offered her. I'll be frank with you, Miss Harper. I need the help, and I don't much care what people in town might say about your father's reputation. Evangeline felt her heart leap with excitement, but she forced herself to remain calm. What would the position involve? 3 afternoons a week, working with the younger children who are struggling with their letters and basic reading. The pay wouldn't be much, but it would be steady work, and I think you might find it rewarding. They discussed the details over tea and Maria's excellent apple cake, and by the time Miss Patterson left, Evangeline had committed to starting the following Monday. As she watched the schoolteacher's buggy disappear down the ranch road, she felt as though another piece of her new life was falling into place. The work at the school proved to be everything she had hoped and more. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 10, were eager to learn and seemed to respond well to her patient, encouraging teaching style. Many of them were the sons and daughters of ranch hands and farmers, and they possessed a natural curiosity about the world beyond their immediate experience. Reading with them reminded Evangeline of the joy she had felt as a child when her grandmother had first opened the world of books to her. Watching their faces light up when they successfully sounded out a difficult word, or when they grasped the meaning of a story they had been struggling with, filled her with a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. More importantly, working at the school began to change how some people in town viewed her. The parents of her students saw firsthand how much their children enjoyed her lessons and how quickly they were progressing under her guidance. Word spread that Black Jack Harper's daughter was not only harmless, but actually beneficial to the community. It wasn't a complete transformation. There were still those who crossed the street when they saw her coming, still whispered comments behind her back. But gradually, the whispers began to change in tone. Instead of suspicion and condemnation, she began to overhear approval and even admiration. "That Harper girl is doing wonders with young Tommy's reading," she heard one mother tell another outside the general store. "He actually asked me to buy him a book last week. Can you imagine?" One evening in late October, as the aspens on the surrounding hills blazed with autumn gold, Wyatt found Evangeline in the garden, harvesting the last of the carrots and turnips before the first hard frost. She was kneeling between the rows, her skirt spread around her and a basket of vegetables beside her when he approached. "The sunset is particularly beautiful tonight," he said, settling cross-legged on the ground beside her. "But I have to say, the view here is even better." Something in his tone made her look up from her work, and she saw an expression in his eyes that she had never seen before, warm and tender and unmistakably romantic. Her heart began to beat faster, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Evangeline," he said quietly, and the sound of her name on his lips was like music. "These past months, watching you build a new life here, seeing you discover your own strength and worth, it's been a privilege, but more than that, it's been a joy." He reached out and touched her hand gently, his fingers warm against her dirt-stained skin. "I know this might seem sudden, and I don't want you to feel pressured in any way. You have a home here regardless of how you might answer what I'm about to ask." Evangeline's breath caught in her throat, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I've fallen in love with you," Wyatt continued, his eyes never leaving her face. "Not with the idea of rescuing someone, not out of pity or obligation, but with the remarkable woman you are. Your kindness, your strength, your intelligence, your courage in facing each day despite everything you've endured. All of it has captured my heart completely." Tears sprang to her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. For so long, she had believed that her father's legacy would prevent her from ever finding love, from ever being seen as worthy of a good man's affection. Yet here was Wyatt, the most respected rancher in the territory, telling her that he loved her not despite her past, but because of who she had chosen to become. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling strange and wonderful in her mouth. "I think I have almost from the beginning, but I was afraid to believe that someone like you could feel that way about someone like me." "There's no someone like you," Wyatt said firmly, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "There's only you, Evangeline Harper, and you're extraordinary." He leaned forward and kissed her then, soft and sweet among the dying garden plants under the vast prairie sky. It was a kiss that spoke of new beginnings and shared futures, of love that had grown slowly and steadily from mutual respect and genuine affection. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So," Wyatt said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "what do you think the good people of Copper Ridge will have to say about the outlaws' daughter marrying the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties? Evangeline laughed, a sound of pure happiness that seemed to echo across the rolling hills surrounding them. "I think they'll have plenty to say. But for the first time in my life, I find I don't much care what they think." The wedding took place the following spring, on a day when the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers and the air was sweet with the promise of new growth. The ceremony was held at the ranch rather than in town, partly to avoid the potential drama of divided opinions among the townspeople, but mostly because both Wyatt and Evangeline agreed that this was where their love had grown and where they wanted to pledge their future together. Miss Patterson served as matron of honor, and Maria Rodriguez cried happy tears throughout the entire ceremony. The guest list included the ranch hands who had become like family, several of the parents whose children Evangeline taught, and even a few of the more progressive citizens of Copper Ridge who had come to respect the young woman despite their initial prejudices. As Evangeline stood in the flower-filled garden beside the man she loved, wearing her grandmother's pearl necklace and a dress of ivory silk that Catherine Crenshaw had sent from Denver, she felt the weight of her father's legacy finally lifting from her shoulders. She would always be Black Jack Harper's daughter. That fact would never change. But she was also Evangeline Crenshaw now, beloved wife, respected teacher, valued member of the community. The preacher's words seemed to float on the warm spring air as he spoke about love and commitment, about the courage it takes to build a life together, about the blessing of finding someone who sees the best in you even when you struggle to see it yourself. When Wyatt slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love and honor her for all the days of their lives, Evangeline knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for without even realizing it. Not just love, but belonging. Not just acceptance, but celebration of who she was and who she was still becoming. Years later, when their children asked about the early days of their courtship, Evangeline would tell them about the morning when their father had approached her on the dusty street of Copper Ridge and offered her not just work, but dignity. She would explain how sometimes the greatest gift one person can give another is the simple belief that they deserve good things in their life. And when those same children occasionally heard whispers about their grandfather's notorious past, they would respond with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly who they were and where they belonged, because they had been raised by parents who understood that a person's true worth is not determined by their family's history, but by their own choices, their own character, and their own capacity for love. The outlaw's daughter had finally found her home, not by running from her past, but by choosing to write a different kind of future. And in that choice, she had discovered that redemption is not something that is granted by others. It is something that grows quietly in the heart of anyone brave enough to keep believing in tomorrow. No matter how dark yesterday might have been,